If you were kidnapped by a serial killer who wants to turn you to a human walrus monster, what would you do? This man won't stop until he's made the perfect creature, so I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the walrus lover in Tusk. This man is about to get a deadly surprise. Arriving at the airport for work, this podcaster Wallace informs the security officer that he's on a trip to Manitoba, Canada, interviewing weird and wacky people so he can describe it to his best friend, but he's got no idea that coming here was his biggest mistake. He arrives at this kid's house hoping to interview him for a show, but finds out that something has gone terribly wrong. The person he wanted to interview is dead, and a memorial service is already being held outside the house. That night, Wallace goes to a bar and calls his partner to inform him of the bad news, mentioning that he has to take a plane flight home, but doesn't want to leave empty-handed. Wallace looks around the bar wondering what he can do next, and goes to the toilet. But as he's peeing, he notices something posted on the wall. Reading this letter from an old man, it describes his life at sea and the many adventures he's undertaken. After years away from land, he was forced to settle down in Manitoba, but doesn't want to spend the end of his life alone in the small town. This could be Wallace's big story, and he calls the man, asking to visit him to learn more about his adventures. At a store, he asks these clerks for directions to Bifrost, who tell him that it's 2 hours away. Driving over, Wallace arrives at the man's estate, getting out of his car, and walking through the dark to find this massive house. The podcaster walks inside and up the staircase, meeting the old adventurer Howard, who welcomes him inside. He insists that the podcaster call him by his first name, and holds out his hand to officially welcome him for the night. Okay, it's never a good idea to head 2 hours deep into the middle of nowhere by yourself, but this old man seems fairly harmless, and Wallace is desperate for a story. It's easy to see why he thinks he isn't in any danger, but there are certain signs that Wallace could have paid attention to in order to see that he was headed straight for his weird and terrible fate. The first sign of danger is when Wallace arrives in the bathroom and notices the poster for the first time. The sign itself is underneath several other flyers, meaning that it's been there for a while. The original poster is inquiring about a roommate, and Howard makes no mention of having filled the occupancy when Wallace calls him. Since the house is 2 hours away and is far from the center of town, Wallace might assume the room hasn't been filled because it's in an undesirable area. But if you look at the poster when Wallace leaves his car to enter the house, almost all the phone numbers hanging from the bottom of it have been removed. Since the house is 2 hours away and is far from the center of town, Wallace might assume the room hasn't been filled because it's in an undesirable area. That means that at the very least, a handful of people have already reached out to him about the room, and it's yet to be filled. In order to learn more about the man I'm driving 2 hours in the middle of nowhere to meet, I would ask whether he has had many people come to see the room and if it's been filled yet. If there are any gaps in his story, this could be an indication of a lie or a trap that has been laid for any wayward souls looking for a place to rest their head. The other tell in Howard's plan is that when Wallace arrives at Howard's house, Wallace must drive through a metal gate and then ascend a set of steps in order to get to meet the old man. Once inside the house, he also has to travel up several more steps before arriving at the main floor where Howard is. Throughout this entire journey, there are no signs of wheelchair-accessible ramps or other devices to help assist Howard around the house. From the outside, the house also looks like it has many levels inside of it, which is not at all a convenient location for a wheelchair-bound person to live. In his letter, Howard mentions that he's in a wheelchair now and needs someone to live there willing to help him with chores that are too inconvenient for him to do. But in order for him to be living there at all, he would need a nurse or someone to help him get in and out of the house. Since there are no other signs of life or any adjustments to the house, this would be a major red flag that something about Howard's situation isn't quite right. Although it's not impossible for him to live here, it's extremely inconvenient, especially since he's so far from a big city or town. Before making myself comfortable, I would have to ask more questions to see how Howard is making do and why he chose this house after committing to life on land. Wallace interrupts him to ask where his bathroom is and goes to take a leak. Returning to the living room, he finds the old man waiting for him with a tray of tea. He takes a cup for himself and drinks as Howard rambles on about his second wife, while the podcaster thanks him for his hospitality. Wanting to know more about him, the old man asks if he plans on living with him, and the interviewer admits that he's not looking for a place to stay, but to learn about Howard. The old man mentions that his walls are lined with memories of his travels, and the podcaster asks him if there's something that comes to mind. Howard here explains that the tea leaves he used were soaked in brandy, and mentions the quote that Ernest Hemingway said to him back in World War II. That's when the old man tells him that he met the famous writer on the same beach the D-Day took place in. They were on the boat together, but Hemingway was too important to be allowed off the boat. With nothing to do, the famous writer looked for alcohol and was helped out by none other than Howard himself. He then directs Wallace's attention to the fireplace where he kept the same bottle they drank that night. Amazed, the man goes over to inspect it, but then spots this wooden stick on the mantelpiece and asks Howard what it is. He explains it's the baculum of a walrus, a bone which helps the animal keep going when it mates. Taking it off its stand, the podcaster sits back down and questions where he bought it. Howard explains that he got it after he was lost at sea near Siberia and was rescued by a walrus he nicknamed Mr. Tusk. But as he's telling the story, Wallace begins to feel sleepy. He tries to grasp the table, realizing that something is wrong, but suddenly he falls over and loses consciousness. The next morning, he wakes up in a daze and sees Howard polishing a tusk. The old man greets the podcaster and wheels himself over to give Wallace something to drink, explaining that he passed out last night after a brown recluse bit him. Confused, the man asks for his phone, but he's told that the doctor who visited him broke it by accident. The podcaster tells him that he can't feel his legs, and the old man explains that he was given a spinal injection after the spider's venom began spreading. The doctor was forced to amputate his leg to save his life, and the man freaks out, questioning why he isn't in the hospital. Furious, he demands to see the doctor, but Howard tells him that the man is busy with other patients as the podcaster tries to get out of the chair. Okay, this is terrifying. Wallace has woken up with one of his legs missing, and there's no way to contact the doctor that supposedly operated on him. Now he's completely at the mercy of this creepy old man in the middle of nowhere, and I would honestly be pissing myself in fear at this point. But the truth is that the entire situation could have been avoided. The biggest problem is that earlier, Wallace was once again assuming he was in no immediate danger, rather than looking for the signs that something might be up. Instead of drinking the tea, I would have looked for clues that hint at Howard's shady interests. When Wallace goes into the bathroom, he sees a creepy doll and turns its face away so that he can relieve himself in peace. If Wallace turned around, he would see that there is a tribal mask over his shoulder. Howard himself mentions that the walls are lined with his life, and if Wallace paid attention to the specific objects on these walls, he could have gained insight into who Howard was before letting his guard down. Depending on the tribe, masks can be used for a variety of reasons. Tribal masks are usually used to represent ancestors or put the wearer in control of the forces of good and evil. This is a sign that Howard could be interested in such activity. If it were me, I would ask Howard where he got the mask and what his thoughts are on good and evil to see where his morality lies before I decide he's a friend or foe. In fact, this is not the only mask that Howard has on his wall. In the living space where Wallace first meets Howard, there's one behind him that is even creepier than the one in the bathroom. This would give me even more of an opportunity to express my interest in them and decide who Howard is before he starts to pull the wool over my eyes with his stories of adventure. Unfortunately for Wallace, as soon as he takes a sip of tea, the man has sealed his fate. But there's one piece of information he can use to help him catch on to Howard's lie after he wakes up from being drugged. Howard mentions that the brown recluse spider bit Wallace, but since he's a road traveler with lots of wilderness experience, he should know that the brown recluse is extremely rare and only usually seen in the central Midwest from Ohio to Nebraska and south through Texas and Georgia. The reason they're also called recluse is because they like to hide themselves in dry, isolated places like under rocks and trees or closets and crawl spaces. Therefore, they are very rarely known to go out in the open unless they are disturbed. On top of that, although their venom is dangerous, they usually only administer a little bit, and medical attention is rarely needed. This makes Howard's story about how common the brown recluse spider is in this area a lot more suspicious than it sounds. If it were me, as soon as Howard mentions that the spider bit me, I would start devising plans for my escape ASAP. If Howard doesn't believe I'm onto him, then I have plenty of time to weapon up and prepare myself to take him on before I lose any more limbs. The house is full of potential items to use as weapons, and all it will take is catching the old man off guard. Wallace realizes that he's been strapped into the wheelchair, and Howard tells him that the belt is there to keep him safe until the spinal injection wears off. It's clear something is suspicious, and the podcaster demands that he give him a chance to call his family, but the old man reveals something shocking. The doctor has removed all the phones from the house, and Howard orders him to take a rest since he's still suffering from the tranquilizer. Wheeling himself away, the old man apologizes for what happened to his leg, but soon he'll discover this man has a dark secret. That night, they eat dinner together, but Wallace here tells him that he can't move his arms. The old man mentions that he's also been injected with morphine to stop the pain, making him sleepy. Howard lectures the man and compares losing a limb to seeing the death of a close friend. Unimpressed, Wallace confronts him, questioning him on the poisonous spider, knowing that something isn't right. Howard continues to ramble on while the podcaster looks in disbelief. Suddenly, Wallace freaks out at him and demands that he let him go. Howard walks over to him, slapping the podcaster in the face and forcing him to quiet down. He walks back to the chair and decides to tell him the truth. Howard is trying to create a realistic walrus suit that'll fit the podcaster's frame perfectly, but he needs to be turned into a walrus before that can happen. Shocked, Wallace begs him not to experiment on him anymore, while the old man calms him down, telling him that they're in this together. Wallace continues to question why he's doing doing this, with the old man giving him a vague response, confessing that he wants to solve a riddle of whether Wallace is a walrus at heart. Terrified, the podcaster howls in shock, being copied by his host, who begins to growl over him like a dog. This innocent man has gotten himself into a world of trouble, and this is only the start. Okay, this old man is a psychopath. He wants to turn the podcaster into a walrus, and there's not much Wallace can do to save himself at the moment, because not only is he strapped into a chair, but he can't move any of his limbs. The man is completely screwed. But even if we aren't able to escape at the moment, there might still be a way to kill him so he can't carry out any of his sick and twisted plans. If it were me, I know that anything I consume will have something in it that's intended to knock me out, so it's important that I don't consume anything else given to me. Accepting this drink from Howard was a mistake he shouldn't have made, because he's already been poisoned, so there's no reason to think that he's just being a nice guy. Having said that, flushing the morphine out of my system is important if I want to gain control over my body again, and morphine is usually flushed out through urine, so drinking water would be necessary in this situation. At this point, I would urinate on myself, forcing Howard to put me in the bathtub in order to clean me off. Although Howard would need to place me in the tub, I would try to convince him to leave me there to soak. Even if he doesn't do this, at any moment he's distracted, I'll drink as much tub water as possible to hydrate myself and flush the morphine out. This is disgusting but necessary, because it usually takes 24 hours for 60% of morphine to be removed from your system, and I need to speed this up as much as possible before Howard has more time to remove any more limbs. As soon as I'm able to gain any level of control over my arms, I would wait for an opportunity where I wasn't being supervised, and look for a phone to call 911. Thankfully, Canada shares the same emergency phone number as America, and a lot more countries than you might think. Calling anyone else I know won't be as helpful, since I don't have any friends or family in the area who can immediately help. Howard has said there aren't any phones in the house, but everything else he has told Wallace is a lie too, so hopefully I'd be able to find some form of communication, whether it's a phone or computer. The best case scenario is finding a landline, because in this situation, I don't even need to know my location in order for emergency services to be able to track where the call is coming from. The other thing Wallace can do is look for morphine and any other medical supplies around the house. Howard has removed Wallace's leg, therefore that means there must be sharp utensils like a medical saw somewhere that he can use to defend himself. Even if he is able to only regain some control over his limbs, he probably won't be at full power, and won't be able to confront Howard just yet. When the old man stands from his chair and slaps Wallace, he's a lot stronger than the podcaster expected. The best case scenario is that he's able to find the morphine and some sort of syringe, so he's easily able to inject the morphine into Howard when he gets close to him. Later, Wallace wakes up to hear loud party music in the other room, and recognizes the song as his ringtone. He wheels himself over to see that his girlfriend Allie is trying to contact him, but just as he reaches for the phone, she hangs up. The woman is back at her apartment, frustrated that he hasn't answered with no idea where Wallace is. The man sends a voicemail to his girlfriend, frantically explaining that he's been abducted by a crazy man who wants to turn him into an animal. He begs the girl to come ASAP, but admits that he doesn't know where he is, only that he's being held captive in a house 2 hours from Winnipeg. Wallace mentions that he's lost a leg and is afraid the old man is going to kill him. He then leaves a voicemail for his best friend, telling him the same details and demanding they call the police. Suddenly, Howard attacks him from behind, knocking him out of his wheelchair, and tells him that his old life is now over. The man insists that he'll be a walrus or be dead before the podcaster blacks out. The next day, Allie wakes up and brushes her teeth, hearing the voicemail her boyfriend sent last night. Shocked, she wakes up his podcasting coworker Teddy to tell him the terrifying news. That's when she realizes that Wallace has called him too, passing the phone to him. Later, Howard lectures the podcaster on his earlier life, mentioning that he was severely mistreated as a child. He explains a story where his parents took him to Montreal, but something went terribly wrong. On the way to dinner, both of his parents were brutally murdered by a group of muggers. He was placed in an orphanage in Quebec, where the provinces were responsible for financially providing services to the young children. Howard adds that the government was responsible for mental institutions, coming up with a scheme to make more money by reclassifying orphanages as mental health care facilities. His new home was shut down, and he was sent to an insane asylum for the next 5 years of his life. The old man was brutally mistreated and taken advantage of. He escaped Canada, moving to the United States, and taking a boat around the world. Suddenly, he reveals that Wallace here has already been cut up and operated on, with his experiment progressing as planned. In another part of Canada, his two friends drive towards Winnipeg while calling the police to notify them of Wallace's disappearance. Allie here tells them that they can find recent pictures of the man on his podcast website, but that's when the operator hangs up, thinking that it's a prank. Okay, this is terrifying. The second he missed Allie's phone call, Wallace should have called 911 instead of leaving a voicemail for her. The good thing about this situation is that when Wallace woke up, even though he's weak, he had regained control over his arms. Therefore, at that point, he has to take advantage of this opportunity while he has the chance. Having the phone is a golden opportunity to make outside contact, and things are only bound to get worse from here on out. Allie's in America, and her boyfriend needs immediate help, or else he's doomed to become a walrus. Wallace can't remember the exact location of the house he's in, and to make matters worse, his cell phone is not a landline, so they can't trace his exact location. However, if he does call 911, they can try to trace his phone by contacting his cell phone provider. 911 will do this by contacting the service provider, who can then supply them with the closest cell tower to where the call is being placed. Even though this information isn't exact, it will definitely help narrow down where he is, and time is of the essence here. The other good thing about doing this is that 911 will dispatch someone regardless of if you make contact with them. If you call 911 and then hang up, they will call back and try to contact you, but if they don't reach you, then they will go in search of who called them. This is helpful because Howard jumps out at Wallace, and as long as he can keep the phone away from the old man long enough for 911 to dispatch someone to search for him, it will increase his chances of being saved. The other missed opportunity that Wallace has here is that even though he's wheelchair bound, he's able to wheel himself into the main living room that he first meets Howard in. As mentioned before, this room is lined with artifacts from the old man's life. Since Howard is an adventurer, he might be able to find some kind of traditional weapons to defend himself against the old man. If not, he should then look at the fireplace mantle and see if he can find a fire poker. In the worst case scenario, he knows that at the very least he can use the dried walrus baculum to bludgeon Howard and knock him unconscious. If it were me, I would take the baculum and aim for his head. If I'm unable to kill him or knock him out, I would try to knock his glasses off his face to put him at a disadvantage while trying to fight me off. The important thing here is to not lose conscious and not let Howard get the upper hand again. If I can knock him out, this will keep him from attacking me further, and if I'm able to call 911 beforehand, knocking him unconscious will give the police more time to get there. Meanwhile, Howard here plays soothing music while the podcaster struggles in agony. His entire body has been cut up and operated on, disfiguring him with no way to escape. Howard tries to calm him down, but the man is in extreme pain and has become a disgusting creature. He continues to lecture the disfigured man, commenting that he hates the world and everyone who lived inside of it, while his friends search the bar for any signs of the missing podcaster. They travel to the police station, showing the cop evidence of Wallace's disappearance and the distressed voicemail that he sent, but it cuts off before he can finish explaining the situation. Hearing this, the investigator questions if Wallace is lying to them. He uses the coworker's podcast as a potential reason why he could be acting this way, but Ali insists that he wouldn't go that far for entertainment. The investigator suggests that he might be sick in the head, but they deny his accusations, and that's when the police officer mentions that there are no reports of Howard living in Manitoba or Wallace leaving the country. The only thing they know is that he entered the country and has left no trace of his whereabouts since. He tells the worried friends that they'll issue a missing persons report, but mentions that the snippet about his leg in the voicemail is concerning. A man came in 2 days ago asking if any legless bodies had turned up recently, saying that he was a cop hunting down a serial killer. The police officer told him that the country doesn't have any serial killers and tells him that he left the number, handing over a card so they can contact the detective. Meanwhile, Wallace here continues screaming out for help. Howard walks in to lecture him about being a true walrus and that he must learn to swim first. Suddenly, the chain attached to him drags Wallace into the water and he panics, trying to stay afloat. Howard demands that he swim, congratulating him on staying above water until the disfigured man sinks below the surface. That's when he spots a dead carcass laid down in the water and realizes he isn't the old man's first victim. Okay, Wallace here is screwed. With no arms and no legs, and his body disfigured into a walrus, it's impossible for him to physically do anything except flap around and try to appease Howard. Right now, his only hope for survival is either convincing the old man to act more humanely, or wait for his friends to save him. Convincing Howard to turn him back seems unlikely, but if Wallace was thinking ahead, he should have been trying to influence the man's decision-making from the very beginning. Up until this point, the most effective weapon that Wallace still has is his voice, but rather than crying and making walrus noises, he should have been using it to remind Howard of his humanity and try to evoke his empathy. In the majority of kidnapping situations, the captor is able to inflict terrible physical and psychological torment on the person that they have kidnapped, because in their minds, they have dehumanized that individual. The kidnapper has othered the person they have kidnapped, which makes it possible to treat them like an object. In Wallace's situation, he has yet to take a sincere moment to exemplify his humanity, and by trying to tell Howard about his family, his girlfriend, or the people he loves, it might slow the old man down in completing Wallace's transformation. If it were me, I would try to dig into Howard's past and connect with him on a human level. Based on the old man's stories, he mentions having been an orphan after his parents were killed, but never talks about his relationship with his mother or father. This could be a possible way into Howard's own humanity. If I am able to uncover a positive memory where someone showed him love and compassion before his life was turned upside down, then it might help him regard me as a human being. I would then talk about my own relationship with my parents, so we are able to relate to one another on this very basic human level. The hope is that by doing this, Howard will empathize with me as an individual, making it harder for him to inflict any more torture. Unfortunately, Wallace didn't consider this approach when he had his best chance to do so, and now that his tongue has been ripped out, this is no longer possible for him. With that said, at this point, the best solution is to do the exact opposite and be as much of a walrus as we possibly can. This might sound counterintuitive, but by playing the role he wants us to play, we might find that it gives us a lot more leeway. If we find ways to give him what he wants on our own terms, it gives us tiny incremental ways to control the situation. And when there are no other tools at our disposal, that can make the difference between life and death. Right now, we just need to buy time. So if we start behaving like a walrus like it was a role for Daniel Day-Lewis, he'll see exactly what he wants to see, and this will inevitably help us buy time and trust. These are the currencies we need to influence the situation when we aren't physically able to do anything else, and finding every angle we can to manipulate the man is the best way to keep ourselves alive until we find help. Now, as far as getting help goes, there are some factors that make this a lot more difficult than it should be. First of all, these Canadian police aren't convinced there are any serial killers in Canada, even though anyone with a phone can quickly research that this is untrue. Despite this, based on their attitude, it's very unlikely that they are interested in helping us find Wallace, and it means we need to find another way to rescue him. Since we are Americans and have crossed the border into Canada, it would be possible to get the American government involved to help with the squeeze in the local police. If it were me, I would immediately go to the US Embassy and let them know the urgency of the situation. The police department will then be forced to act, because nobody wants to have a foreign government breathing down their neck. It just so happens that one of the US consulates is located in downtown Winnipeg, which is not too far away from them. Wallace goes missing in Bifrost, which is a 1.5-hour drive north of the consulate, so his girlfriend and his friend shouldn't be too far to go there themselves to put pressure on the situation. Using the car to contact the detective, the friends meet up with Inspector Guy Lapointe, who tells them that he spent 20 years working for the Provincial Police Service of Quebec. Since then, he spent the last 10 years hunting on a terrifying serial killer whose managed to not get caught. He's responsible for a number of disgusting actions, and Guy has dedicated his entire life to take him down. But with their voicemails from Wallace, the man has finally got a promising lead after all these years. That's when the waitress interrupts to serve them their food, and the guy rambles on before mentioning an important detail about the serial killer's victims. The inspector reveals that the police usually find pieces of a skinned body a month after Howard's victims disappear, with their legs amputated at the knee. The arms are fused to their body, and their mouths have been surgically altered. Ali questions what he means, and Guy casually explains that their tongues are ripped out. It's horrifying for the friends to hear, and they realize the same thing is going to happen to the podcaster. Disgusted, she asks him if the victims were ever violated, but Guy denies anything of that matter. The deranged man is known only for butchering people and amputating parts of their body for his own entertainment. As a result, the police had jokingly nicknamed him the First Wife because he forces them to stay home and doesn't have sex with them. Fed up, Teddy questions if they should talk with someone else, annoyed by the man's constant rambling. Guy here tells him to shut up and asks them to come closer, as he whispers in their ears that he actually met the man 2 years ago, but didn't realize it until it was too late. Explaining what happened, the inspector had been investigating the trail of a missing hockey player, and that led him to finding Howard. The deranged man asked him if he's here for the spider infestation, telling him that he called the police to help out with his pest issue. He responds by telling him that he's a detective and isn't here for the spiders. He asks the old man if he's seen the missing hockey player, and mentions that he saw an advertisement in a bar bathroom that was offering a place to stay near his house the Monday night of his disappearance. Howard bluffs, pretending to be helping out down at the local ice rink every Monday, and asks the man if he's willing to help out with his spider infestation. Annoyed, Guy thinks he's wasting his time and explains his job isn't to deal with pests, but didn't realize that he was face to face with a dangerous criminal. That's when the inspector reveals that the whole story that Howard told him was a lie. The hockey player was probably in his house, and the investigator never realized until it was too late. A month later, they found the remains of the hockey player blocking a sewer pipe in western Quebec. Howard disappeared when they went back to look for him, and when the inspector searched up his name, he discovered that it was fake. His failure to catch the killer made him lose his job, and Guy's determined to bring him to justice. Okay, Guy here is completely inept, and you can see why it's taken him 20 years to track down this one serial killer. You can also see why the local police didn't exactly take him seriously when he approached them about this case. If it were me, I would take all the information that Guy has collected over the years and use it to try to identify the deranged man. Based on the way the bodies have been mutilated, the deranged man must have some medical history to keep his victims alive long enough to dismember them. I would then look to see if any medical professionals have been fired for malpractice. If Howard isn't a trained medical professional, but has acquired his his skills on his own, he still needs to get his equipment from somewhere in order to carry out his plans. Anesthesia and other medical utensils used to carry out advanced surgeries are usually only available to hospitals or doctors or when prescribed by a medical individual, so there has to be some sort of paper trail that can lead us to him. I would research the sorts of devices that are necessary to carry out these practices and see where and when they've been purchased locally in the area over the last 20 years. Since Guy's a former inspector, he can't get a court order to demand this information, and this is where we would have to get the US Embassy on our side again to force local law enforcement to work with us. Hospitals usually have procedures for these purchases, which includes a purchase requisition, highlighting the need for the devices and equipment. If the devices have been stolen or extras have been purchased, we will be able to see these discrepancies in the purchase requisition. Even if Howard bought these devices on the black market, their origin would have to be linked back to a hospital or doctor somewhere, which would be a good place to start. Finding who stole this medical equipment and who they sold them to could link us directly to the killer. Now, Guy also mentions that not only is the name Howard an alias, but he also lied about being a hockey coach's assistant. Almost everything we know about this man is completely made up, but there's still one piece of information we can use to our advantage. We know what the man looks like, and the detective could have had the police sketch a facial composite so that he could take it to public venues in the area. It will quickly become clear that nobody from any ice rinks will recognize the man since he was lying, but people from local bars will, because he's been posting advertisements in their bathrooms. The man would have also needed to have his real name on record if he had rented or purchased the house. The fact that he lied to a police officer during an investigation of the missing hockey player should be enough to convince the police to investigate the man. We already know they don't want to be helpful, but doing the legwork for them to track down where we can get access to his name and location is going to make it a lot easier for them to issue a warrant. And with the US Embassy's help, this detective will have everything he needs to find the serial killer he's been tracking down for 20 years. The inspector continues by explaining his theory that each victim has had their limbs cut off with holes cut into their mouths. The police assume they were caused by meat hooks to hang their bodies, but he has a different opinion. Talking with a medical examiner, they found holes in the roof of the hockey player's mouth that had a piece of his leg bone stuck inside. Guy decided to ask the mother of the deceased player and question her on how she thought her son was killed. That's when the mother spoke the words, "This man is making a monster," and it suddenly became clear to the detective that this killer was trying to turn his victims into something else. Meanwhile, the old man continues to lecture the podcaster and convince him that being a walrus is better than living as a human. Howard admits that he's getting tired as he lays down on his victim's body and recites a poem before realizing that walrus might be getting hungry. Leaving the enclosure, the old man throws him a mackerel and says goodbye for the night. He walks out of the room and shuts this heavy-duty door, but as the old man looks through the window, he sees the podcaster slowly crawling towards the food like a real walrus. His dream is coming true, and soon he can finally put an end to his killing. In the car, he asks the two about who knows Wallace best. Allie puts her hand up, and the investigator tells her that the podcaster's phone message said he was driving for around 2 hours. He questions the girl on what Wallace's habits are when he drives, and Allie remembers that he likes to drink big gulps on long trips. The group visits the same convenience store that Wallace first went to, and the cashiers recognize a photo of the podcaster. The girls remember that Wallace came inside trying to find the old man's address, asking them for a pen to write it down. He mentioned on the phone that it would take him 2 hours from this location while they teased the man for his mustache. He asked them to hand over the pad of paper he used to write down the address. Taking it, he scribbles on the paper while the others look at him confused until they realize he's etching over the indentations, revealing what Wallace wrote. They know where to go, and soon they'll discover the horrifying truth. Meanwhile, Howard continues to train the podcaster, giving him swimming lessons while he plays soothing music. The old man tells him that it reminds him of his days back at sea, and pretends as if he was the same walrus that helped him survive when he was shipwrecked all those years ago. The man declares that Wallace is prepared for what's to come, and dips his head into the water while he nearly suffocates. With their swimming lesson over, Howard leaves and makes it clear to the podcaster that they will soon fight to the death whether he likes it or not. Okay, this is insane. The old man has turned the podcaster into a walrus just so that they can fight each other until only one of them survives. No matter who wins the fight, it's not going to end well for Wallace, and his only true chance of surviving this situation is if his friends find him first. Now, Guy Lepointe and the girlfriend Allie are hot on Howard's trail, and they know from the other bodies that have been found by the detective, Wallace is probably dismembered. That's why they should call for medical services, tell them their friend's life is in danger, give them the address, and meet them there at the serial killer's house. Wallace will have to be taken away immediately for serious medical care and for a psychological evaluation from all the trauma he's been through. Although he has been physically mutilated, he isn't dead yet, and the man might be able to have surgeries to reverse what has been done to him to give him his life back. Having the walrus suit removed from him might take a very advanced surgeon, and it's better for the damage to be assessed as soon as possible. We also don't know how dangerous the man is in terms of firepower, so arming Alfie and Teddy with any guns he has with him will help them protect themselves. However, time is of the essence, and they need to get going immediately to make sure the podcaster isn't killed. In Wallace's case, his transformation into a walrus is almost complete. He's not speaking at all, and he has eaten raw fish in order to survive. There's not much more he can do to salvage any humanity he has left, but as desperate as the situation seems, the good news is that Howard may be a lot more likely to unchain me if he's already getting complacent enough to lay on top of me and rest his eyes. We also don't have any feet, so it makes us a lot less threatening. The more peaceful and approachable we make ourselves appear, the more likely he is to release us from our chains, and at this point, it's the one last thing we can do to gain control of the situation and try attacking him in any way we can. If I were the podcaster, I would try to overpower Howard when he gets near me and lay on top of him so he can't get up. I would then try to stab him with my tusks to harm him, but I would hesitate to go so far as killing Howard because I don't know for a fact that anyone is coming to get me at this point, and the old man is the only one that is keeping me alive. Outside, the group finds Wallace's car in the lake near Howard's estate. Allie tries to check it out, but Guy stops her, insisting that her boyfriend isn't here. Opening up a box full of weapons, the investigator hands each of them a gun that they both reluctantly take. At the same time, Howard here lectures his new pet and mentions that he feels guilty for butchering Mr. Tusk. He was forced to kill the innocent animal without a fight when he was shipwrecked, but now it's time to right his wrongs. That's when Howard reveals he's in a walrus suit of his own and challenges him to a fight, making it clear only one of them will be leaving this place alive. The group hears screaming from inside his estate and sprint towards the house. Barging in, they head upstairs to look for their friend, while Howard tells the podcaster that he now has two decisions: either to be killed or kill the old man, but live the rest of his days as a walrus. They continue fighting while his friends hear the terrified screaming. Howard praises the podcaster on his survival instincts and escapes from his suit before taking out a weapon to kill Wallace. That's when the deformed man stabs his tusk into Howard's foot. His friends track down the screaming, hearing it coming from behind this wall, and shoot the latch open before kicking the door down. At the same time, Wallace brutally stabs the old man with his tusks, and Howard announces that the podcaster is now Mr. Tusk before dying on the spot. Suddenly, his friends rush in, pointing their guns, while realizing that Wallace has now been changed forever. It's horrifying, and the investigator aims his gun at the podcaster while his friends beg him to stop. A year later, they go to the local wildlife center to go visit Wallace. The two call out to him and try to get him to come out of hiding. When he doesn't leave, the girlfriend grabs the mackerel she brought and throws it into his enclosure. His friends watch as he finally acknowledges them stuck as a walrus for the rest of his life and having learned a valuable lesson. True crime podcasters need to be careful because sometimes life imitates art.
But what do you think? How would you be Tusk? Let me know with a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out the How to Beat playlist for more videos like this. Until next time, have a damn good day.